Believing she was alone on her way home, Emily didn't realize 3 sinister figures shadowed her every step, eventually trapping her in a dark, secluded hallway. Blocking any chance of escape, fear tightened its grip on Emily. She braced for the worst, until the elevator doors slid open to reveal a Navy SEAL accompanied by his imposing German Shepherd. Together, they were about to deliver a lesson to these criminals that would linger in their memories forever. Before we dive in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your soul, please join us by subscribing for more. Late October's biting wind swept through Chicago's concrete canyons, carrying the sharp, cold scent of looming winter mixed with the metallic tang of rain against the city's streets. It was the kind of cold that seeped through every layer, settling deep into the core. Yet for Emily, the chill was nothing compared to the weight of exhaustion dragging down her eyelids. At 26, Emily was a devoted nurse, her gentle eyes framed by golden wheat-colored hair, usually pulled back into a practical bun, though loose strands now tumbled wildly about her face. After just finishing a grueling double shift at the city hospital, her feet throbbed in concert with the dull ache pulsing behind her temples. The bus ride home blurred by neon lights streaking past rain-slicked windows, a dizzying cascade of color against the darkened glass. But stepping off near her apartment, her senses sharpened sharply, the street unusually quiet for a Friday night. Shadows stretched long and warped beneath flickering amber street lamps, and Emily's grip tightened on her tote bag, knuckles blanching white. She had called this a neighborhood home for 3 years, normally safe, but recent whispers among elderly neighbors of strangers lurking near the park had everyone on edge. As she made her way through the 2 blocks to her building, heavy footsteps echoed behind her, bouncing off the brick walls. The echoes were purposeful, deliberate, not the rhythmic beat of a late-night jogger. She paused, feigning a glance at her phone, and the footsteps stilled. When she moved again, the stalking resumed. 3 silhouettes lingered nearby, their presence sensed more than seen, reflected in dark puddles at her feet. Her heartbeat thundered wildly inside her chest, a frantic signal warning her of danger. She quickened her stride, eyes locked on the looming sanctuary of her apartment building. Her trembling hands fumbled with keys, finally unlocking the heavy glass door, which clicked shut just as the 3 men emerged from the shadows around the corner. Without turning back to see if they halted, she focused solely on reaching the safety of her 4th-floor apartment. The lobby stood empty, its usual night doorman absent, likely caught up in a maintenance task in the basement, an eerie emptiness that left Emily feeling vulnerable. She pressed the elevator button repeatedly, willing the doors to open, then slipped inside as soon as they parted. Fingers trembling, she hit the button for her floor, leaning against the cool metal wall as the elevator ascended. Releasing a shaky breath, she tried to convince herself she was merely tired, that her mind conjured dangers from fatigue. But when the elevator chimed and the doors slid open on the 4th floor, that fragile relief shattered completely. The hallway, normally warm and welcoming, with soft beige carpets and gentle lighting, now felt like a snare. At the corridor's end, the stairwell door swung closed with a soft snap blocking her path. Standing between her and her apartment were the 3 men from the street, likely having dashed up the stairs while she waited. They were close to her age, yet radiated a sinister menace that filled the cramped space. The one in the center, clad in a dark leather jacket, far too large for him, stepped forward with a chilling smirk that never reached his cold, hard eyes. Flanking him were 2 others, one in a worn gray hoodie, the other with a toothpick casually chewed between his lips, both exuding cocky arrogance. This wasn't mere loitering, they were predators, and Emily stood frozen, clutching her bag tightly, heart pounding with dread. "Long night, sweetheart." The man in the leather jacket growled, his voice rough and gravelly. He didn't rush. He moved with the steady confidence of a hunter certain his prey had nowhere left to run. "You look like you could use some company?" The other 2 sneered their laughter, a low, chilling sound that made Emily's skin crawl. She stepped back, but the elevator doors snapped shut behind her. "Please just let me pass," Emily whispered. Her voice quivered, despite her attempt to sound firm and in control. "My husband's waiting inside," she lied, praying the threat of another man would hold them at bay. The man in the hoodie laughed harshly. "We saw you come in alone. Nobody's waiting for you." They edged closer. Closing in, Emily retreated until her back slammed against the wall. The hallway's air grew thin, suffocating. She thought of the pepper spray buried deep in her bag, but knew there wasn't time to reach it. Just as the leader reached to grab her arm, a soft chime shattered the tension. The second elevator farther down the hall near her apartment arrived, doors sliding open. Jack stepped out. At 35, he was a man who filled a space not with noise, but with quiet, undeniable intensity. Wearing simple gray sweatpants and a navy blue hoodie, he barely concealed the powerful breadth of his shoulders. His face was handsome, but weathered, etched with the scars of a life spent facing the world's darkest corners. A Navy SEAL on leave the neighborhood only knew him as the quiet, polite man from apartment 4B. But it wasn't just Jack who emerged. By his side, attached to a loose leather leash, was Gunnar. Gunnar, a towering 4-year-old German shepherd, boasted a coat so deep black and rich tan it shimmered under the hallway lights. His ears swiveled like radar dishes, and his intelligent amber eyes took in everything. Nothing escaped his watchful gaze. They had just returned from a late-night run, both breathing steady, their movements perfectly in sync. For a moment, time in the hallway froze. Jack assessed the scene in an instant. A terrified young woman pressed against the wall, and 3 men forming a predatory semicircle, the air thick with fear and menace. He didn't shout or charge forward, he simply stopped. The sudden stillness radiating from a man his size was more terrifying than any scream. The 3 thugs turned toward the newcomer, their bravado flickering and faltering for a fleeting second. "Walk away, man," the leader sneered, trying to reclaim control. "This isn't your fight." Jack stared back with utter boredom etched across his face, his eyes cold as the Chicago wind outside. He let just a sliver of tension ease on Gunnar's leash. "Watch." Jack's voice dropped to a whisper, soft, but carrying an ironclad command that brooked no refusal. Instantly, Gunnar transformed. The playful, panting dog vanished, replaced by a fierce guardian. He lowered his head, his hackles rising like jagged spikes down his spine. A deep, resonant growl rumbled from his chest, a sound more felt in the bones than heard, a seismic shift warning of what was to come. He didn't bark. Barking was for warnings. This was a vow, a promise of unyielding violence. His lips curled back, revealing teeth sharp and white against black gums, his fierce gaze locking onto the leader's throat. One stiff-legged step forward set him perfectly between Emily and her assailants. The gang's leader stumbled back, eyes wide with primal fear, the kind etched into human DNA when facing a true apex predator like Gunnar. "I said." Jack spoke again, his voice dropping deeper, a low warning thunder rolling through the tense hallway. Calm and fearless, it was time for him to walk away. He didn't reach for a weapon or clench his fists. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, exuding the unwavering confidence of a man who fully understood the strength of both himself and his dog. The silence that followed was brief, barely a heartbeat, yet it stretched into a timeless moment. The thug in the hoodie glanced from the towering dog to the stoic man holding the leash, and his courage faltered. "Let's go, Mike," he muttered, backing away. "This isn't worth it," he grumbled, retreating toward the stairwell. The leader shot Jack one final glare, hoping to save some shred of pride. But Gunnar snapped his jaws, a bone-chilling crack of teeth colliding, and the man recoiled sharply. "You're lucky, pal." The thug hissed a hollow threat as he spun and practically fled up the stairs. His 2 partners scrambled behind him, and the heavy fire door slammed shut with a force that echoed like gunfire through the still hallway. Jack stood still, waiting until the footsteps died away down the stairwell, before slowly exhaling. "It's okay now," he said quietly. Gunnar immediately relaxed the ridge along his back, smoothing out his ears, lifting in a friendly gesture as he looked to Jack for reassurance. Jack bent down, scratching the dog gently behind the ears, before turning to the young woman still pressed against the wall. Emily's chest rose and fell sharply, tears stinging her eyes in shock. She had always been uneasy around Gunnar. Whenever she saw Jack and his large dog in the elevator before she'd wait for the next one, intimidated by his size and wolf-like presence. But now, gazing at the dog, who had just stood between her and terror, she saw something different. "Are you all right?" Miss Jack asked softly, his tone shedding its earlier steel, now gentle and kind. He kept a respectful distance, giving her room to breathe. Emily nodded, though her knees felt unsteady beneath her. She glanced down at Gunnar. The dog approached her slowly, sensing her distress. He didn't leap or bark. Instead, he quietly leaned his heavy, warm body against her legs, offering silent solace. Her hand trembling, Emily reached down and buried her fingers in his thick, comforting fur. It was solid and warm. I think so," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you, both of you," she added. Jack returned a small, reassuring smile, the kind that creased the corners of his eyes with kindness. "We're neighbors," he said simply. "Now let's get you back inside your door." For the first time that night, the cold grip of fear in Emily's stomach began to thaw, replaced by a gentle warmth of safety and gratitude. The terrifying figure in the hallway had revealed itself as a guardian angel cloaked in fur. The Saturday morning sun poured over Chicago, a sharp but welcome contrast to the cold rain the night before. It filtered through Emily's kitchen blinds, casting golden light on dust motes dancing in the air and warming the countertops where freshly baked blueberry muffins cooled on a wire rack. Emily hummed softly, though a faint tremor lingered in her hands as she arranged the muffins into a woven basket. The terror of the night had faded with the daylight, replaced by a cautious unease, but Emily was a woman who trusted in the healing power of routine and kindness. She covered the muffins with a checkered napkin, took a deep breath, and smoothed down her sweater before stepping out into the hallway. Now the corridor appeared innocent, the beige carpet freshly vacuumed the walls, silent, hiding nothing of the danger that had once lurked there. She walked the short distance to apartment 4B and knocked firmly. Inside she heard movement, the heavy thump of paws on hardwood, and then the lock clicked. Jack opened the door, transformed by daylight. Clad in a fitted gray t-shirt and jeans, he looked strong and alert, the embodiment of a man still in his prime, ready for whatever came next. Beside him, Gunnar sat alert, his tail tapping a slow, steady rhythm against the floor. "Good morning," Emily said softly. Holding out the basket with a shy smile, she added, "I wanted to properly thank you for last night. I honestly don't know what I would have done if you two hadn't gotten off that elevator." Jack's expression softened, and he stepped back, motioning for her to come inside. "You really don't have to do this, but I appreciate it. Come on in, coffee's just about ready." Emily stepped into his apartment, which was sparse, yet immaculate, organized with military precision, a temporary refuge for a man accustomed to constant movement. Gunnar cautiously approached Emily, sniffing the air near the basket. "He's got a soft spot for blueberries," Jack said with a rare chuckle as he poured 2 mugs of coffee. "But don't let that fool you, he's on a strict diet." They sat down at the small kitchen table. As Emily scratched behind Gunnar's ears, she noticed a faint streak of silver fur tracing along his flank, a scar. "What happened to him?" she asked gently. Jack looked down at the dog with a look filled with respect and a shadow of sorrow. "Shrapnel," Jack explained, his voice steady. "We were deployed overseas together. He took a hit meant for my team leader during a breach. It wasn't life-threatening, but it injured his hip. That meant he couldn't keep pace with the operational demands anymore." Jack took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. "So he got medically retired. Since I'm on leave for a few weeks before my next rotation, I started fostering him. But honestly, I think I'm going to make it permanent. He's seen enough battlefields. He deserves a couch and some peace. I'm the one who has to go back, not him." Emily looked at the majestic dog with newfound admiration. He wasn't just a pet. He was a veteran who had earned his rest while his handler remained in the fight. Jack set his mug down. His demeanor shifted from casual to serious. "Emily, I've been thinking about last night. I've been through plenty of tough situations. But those men, they weren't your run-of-the-mill attackers. Emily's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Jack leaned forward, elbows on the table. Muggers usually act on impulse. They want a quick snatch of a purse or phone, then they disappear. But those guys, they cornered you, hurt you, and blocked your escape to the stairs. They weren't after your bag. They were after you. And they seemed to be waiting for something. Or someone. Have you noticed anyone watching you before? Jack asked. Emily shook her head, a cold shiver running down her spine. No, just this constant feeling of being unsafe lately. Before Jack could reply, a sharp knock at the open door interrupted them. Standing there was Martha. Martha was 72, a petite woman with bright silver curls framing her face, eyes sparkling with both kindness and keen intelligence. She wore a floral housecoat and clutched a newspaper in her hands. Martha had lived in the building for 30 years. She knew the story behind every creaky floorboard and every tenant, the building's unofficial historian and guardian. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said crisply, "but I caught the scent of blueberries and I saw the door was open." Her gaze immediately fell on the dog. "Hello, Gunner, you handsome devil." Gunner wagged his tail enthusiastically, clearly Martha's favorite. "Come on in, Martha," Jack said, standing up to pull out a third chair. "We were just talking about what happened last night." Martha's face darkened instantly. "I heard about that terrible incident. It only confirms what I suspected." She sat down, glancing between Jack and Emily. "I didn't want to say anything. I thought maybe I was just being a nosy old woman. Just 2 days ago, I noticed a blue van parked across the street. Its wheel wells rusted. 2 men sat inside for hours watching. Then yesterday morning, I saw one of them. The one with a toothpick lingering in the lobby, pretending to glance at the mailboxes. He wasn't after mail, sweetheart. He was reading the names on the buzzers." Emily felt the color drain from her face. "They were tracking me." Martha reached out gently and patted Emily's hand. "I can't say for sure, dear, but there's no doubt they were doing their homework. That's why I keep my door chain locked." Jack nodded slowly, piecing it together like a seasoned recon specialist. He murmured, "They verified the target. This wasn't some random act." Jack's gaze hardened as he looked at Emily. "We need to check your apartment. If they're this brazen, they might have tried sneaking inside before you got back to set something up." The 3 of them left Jack's place and headed down the hall toward Emily's door. The door felt different now, not just a wooden barrier, but the front line of a battle she didn't yet comprehend. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached into her pocket for her keys. Her hand shook as she slipped the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn smoothly. It jammed. "That's odd," she whispered, jiggling it. "It always turns easily." Jack stepped back, his voice firm yet quiet. He moved close to this door, inspecting the metal plate around the lock. There, barely visible to the untrained eye, but clear to him, were fresh, jagged scratches. The metal bent outward at the edges. Someone had tried to shim the lock or force it open with a tool. Gunner Jack's German Shepherd was already signaling. The dog stepped forward, nose working overtime, as he sniffed the base of the door, then rose to the handle. Suddenly, Gunner stiffened the hairs on his neck, standing on end, as he unleashed a sharp, piercing bark, not a growl, but a warning. Alert and tense, he looked first at Jack, then back at the door, whining urgently, his posture rigid and protective. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, fear creeping into her voice. "He smells someone," Jack replied grimly, placing a steady hand on the doorframe to stop her from trying the key again. "Or he detects that someone has been here recently, a stranger who doesn't belong." The air in the hallway seemed to chill. The sanctuary of Emily's home had been breached, or at least someone tried, and the enemy was not just close, they were organized more so than they had ever dared imagine. The harsh, mechanical whir of an electric drill broke the tense silence. That sharp sound, somehow practical and grounding in a dire moment, came from Jack, standing strong by the front door. Furrowing his brow with focus, he drove 3-inch steel screws firmly into the strike plate of the doorframe. He wasn't merely fixing the damage from the break-in attempt. He was fortifying their line of defense. Emily watched from the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. It felt surreal to see this man, someone she once only nodded to politely in the elevator, now tearing apart her front entry with the confident precision of a seasoned engineer. Yet it was Gunnar who truly commanded the scene. The massive German shepherd was no longer a visitor. He was on patrol, moving through Emily's living room, with slow, deliberate steps sniffing along the baseboards, checking windows and circling the corners of the sofa. He was mapping out the terrain, staking claim to this territory as his own to protect. Every few minutes he'd return to Emily, pressing his wet nose gently against her leg to check in, then silently resume his vigilant watch. "That should hold," Jack said, testing the door with a confident push. He had installed a heavy-duty deadbolt and wrapped the frame with reinforced metal plating to bolster their defenses. "If anyone wants to break in now, they'll have to tear down the entire wall." He stowed his tools carefully into a rugged canvas bag. With practiced efficiency, he crossed over to the kitchen island and accepted the steaming cup of coffee Emily offered. Then Jack's voice dipped into that serious, analytical tone that made Emily straighten up. "We need to understand why nobody risks breaking into an occupied apartment in a building wired with cameras unless they're promised something big." "Emily, how long have you lived here?" "About 6 months," Emily answered, her brow creasing. "I took over the lease from a guy who left in a rush. The landlord said he fled town owing rent." Jack's eyes narrowed sharply. "Do you know his name, Marcus?" "Marcus Thorne," I think Emily said, digging into her memory. "I still get mail addressed to him sometimes. Mostly junk, but a few weeks ago one looked like a court summons." Jack pulled out his phone. "Marcus Thorne," he repeated, typing the name into a search field. He scrolled for a moment, his expression tightening. Here he is arrested 2 years ago for ties to an upscale burglary ring based in the Gold Coast. He got out on a technicality pending trial, then disappeared. Jack showed Emily his phone screen. A mugshot stared back, a man with restless eyes and a faint scar trailing down his cheek. "If this is the guy who lived here before you, those men aren't shadowing you just for sport, Emily. They believe Thorne left behind something valuable." The truth landed on Emily like a punch to the gut. She glanced around her once cozy living room, now feeling like a secret vault for someone else's hidden treasures. "So I'm living inside a treasure trove," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "Potentially," Jack said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "But knowing the motive helps us predict their next moves. They want this apartment empty, that's why they tracked your routines. They're out to snatch you for the key or scare you off." He locked eyes with her, blue, fierce but gentle. "I won't let that happen. But you need to be ready, Gunnar, and I can't be everywhere at once." For the next hour, the cramped living room morphed into a training ground. Jack moved the coffee table aside. "I'm not trying to make you a fighter overnight," he said, standing in front of her. "I want to teach you how to carve out space. Space means time, and time means survival." He demonstrated how to break a wrist grip not by pulling back, but by twisting against the thumb, the hand's weakest link. He taught her the palm heel strike, a blow harder than a punch, yet safer for her own hand. "If someone grabs you," Jack said, holding a padded cushion he'd brought from his place, "don't hold back. Strike with force, yell fire. Not help, because people tend to ignore calls for help and then run." They practiced till Emily was slick with sweat and gasping for air. But for the first time in a day, she felt a flicker of power. She was more than a helpless victim trapped in a hallway. Throughout the training, Gunnar laid by the window, his head resting on his paws, but eyes locked on every move. Whenever Emily landed a solid strike on the cushion, Gunnar would let out a soft, approving woof tail tapping the floor. It was a quiet, bonding moment, a makeshift family forming in the face of looming danger. By late afternoon, the apartment felt heavy with tension, and Jack suggested they get outside. "We need fresh air, and Gunnar needs to stretch his legs. Staying locked indoors only feeds the fear." They set off for the large community park a few blocks away. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the trees ablaze in fiery russets and shimmering golds. Families were out, kids laughing as they soared on the swings. Gunnar let out a gentle woof of approval, his tail softly tapping the floor, a quiet, heartfelt moment of connection. A fragile bond forming like a new family forged in the face of hardship. As afternoon shadows deepened, the apartment's air grew thick with tension, and Jack finally suggested they step outside for a walk. "We all need a breath of fresh air, and Gunnar needs to stretch those legs," Jack said. "Being trapped inside only feeds the fear." Together they set off toward the sprawling community park just a few blocks away. It was a vibrant autumn day, the trees ablaze with hues of deep crimson and shimmering gold. Families dotted the landscape, children's laughter ringing as they swung back and forth on the playground swings. The stark normality of everything unsettled Emily as she walked beside Jack, who held Gunnar's leather leash with a relaxed grip. "You're holding up well," Jack said softly. She caught herself scanning the park's edges again, a habit she was learning from him. "Situational awareness," Jack said, "is your greatest defense." "I think I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light," Emily confessed, clutching her coat tighter against the biting wind. "Like shadows lurk everywhere. Those shadows were always there," Jack replied gently. "You just learned how to read them differently." They moved onto a quiet path flanked by thick hedges. Away from the playground, Gunnar was happily sniffing a mound of leaves, but suddenly something shifted. The change was the same Emily had witnessed in the hallway, abrupt and intense. One moment he was just a dog, the next a living, breathing weapon awakening. He froze his ears, swiveling forward like radar dishes aimed at a cluster of oaks about 50 yards ahead. Near the park's edge, a low growl rose deep in his chest, vibrating up the leash straight into Jack's steady hand. "Easy," Jack whispered. But Gunnar's eyes locked onto the target. A shadowy figure, partially hidden behind a sturdy tree trunk phone, raised recording them. It was the man with the toothpick from the gang. The moment he realized he'd been caught, he spun to flee. "Fast!" Jack commanded sharply in German C's. He dropped the leash and Gunnar launched into action. He wasn't just running, he was flying. His paws tore up the grass as he closed the gap with terrifying swiftness, a black and tan missile locked on. The man glanced back, panic flooding his face as the beast bore down. He scrambled toward the street, aiming for a rusted sedan idling there. Emily covered her mouth, breath-hitching, as Gunnar soared over a park bench in one powerful leap. The man reached the car just as Gunnar lunged forward. The dog's jaws snapped mere inches from the man's ankle as he dove into the back seat. The car door slammed shut, grazing the edge of Gunnar's muzzle. But Gunnar didn't cry out. He slammed his weight against the metal, barking fiercely, claws scratching at the glass, refusing to yield. The tires screamed burning rubber as the car sped away, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and a frustrated Gunnar stranded in the road. Jack jogged over, whistling a sharp recall. Without hesitation, Gunnar broke pursuit and trotted back to Jack, though his eyes never stopped watching the retreating vehicle. Jack knelt, inspecting Gunnar's nose for injury. "Good boy," he murmured, fastening the leash once more. Rising, he glanced at Emily, his jaw clenched hard. "They're not just staking out the apartment, they're shadowing us. It's time to take this to the next level." The psychological battle had begun not with gunfire, but with the shrill, unrelenting ring of a phone slicing through the stillness of night. For the third consecutive night, Emily was jolted awake at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. Her phone's screen glowed faintly in the dark, displaying a restricted number. When she finally braved answering, no voice met her ears. Only heavy, labored breathing echoed, followed by a warped recording of a nursery rhyme that cut off, suddenly chilling her to the bone. It was eerily childish, but given recent events, utterly haunting. By Wednesday, the harassment had stepped from the shadows of the digital world onto her doorstep. Leaving for her shift, Emily noticed a small cardboard box resting on her welcome mat. Inside wasn't an explosive device, but something far crueler. A shattered porcelain doll, its face broken, cradled by a bed of dead black roses. Attached was a note, jagged script scrawled across the paper. "Finders, keepers, losers weep." The message was unmistakable. They knew where she lived, understood her vulnerability, and their tolerance was wearing dangerously thin. Jack spotted the package before Emily could even reach for it. He'd been waiting for her, his internal clock perfectly synced with her routine. "Don't touch it," he ordered, calm but resolute. From his belt pouch, he pulled out a pair of latex gloves, ready for whatever came next. They're trying to flush you out to seize the evidence. Fear makes people slip up. They want you to panic and bolt so they can ransack the place without anyone stepping in. Jack's expression hardened. He'd seen this move countless times during deployments. It was a textbook insurgent tactic: unsettle the target before the strike hits. At that moment, he knew passive defense wouldn't cut it anymore. Backup was essential, but not just any backup. He needed someone who truly grasped the gravity of the situation. That afternoon, Jack sat in his car, parked with a clear line to the apartment entrance, dialing a number he hadn't touched in months. On the second ring, a gruff voice answered O'Connor. Sergeant Mike O'Connor was a solid, no-nonsense man, a 20-year veteran cop who had served as a Marine before donning the badge. He was worn down honest to a fault and owed Jack a favor from a long-ago joint training mission. "It's Jack," he said simply. "I've got a situation on 4th Street. A civilian's in the crosshairs of a crew hunting for a stash left by the previous tenant, Marcus Thorne." O'Connor let out a low whistle. "Thorne, that guy's slippery." "Look, Jack, if Thorne's involved, this isn't some street squabble. That crew's dangerous. I can't station a squad car there 24/7. Without a warrant or active crime, the red tape ties my hands." Jack's eyes narrowed as a suspicious sedan cruised slowly past the building. "I'm not asking for a patrol car. I want intel. Run the plate alert the patrol officers if they get a 911 from this address. It's legit. I'm on site." O'Connor paused. "You watching the girl?" "I am," Jack replied steadily. "Watch your 6th Navy. I'll text you everything I uncover." The tension hanging over the building was thick, a heavy fog settling over everyone. But that evening, a sudden shock shattered the gloom. An accident, not a crime. A sharp thud followed by a cry of pain echoed down the stairwell. Jack, in his living room doing push-ups with a gunner by his side, was out the door in an instant. At the same moment, Emily opened her door. On the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors lay Martha. The elderly woman had missed a step while carrying her laundry basket. Emily gasped. Nursing instincts took over as Emily rushed down the stairs, Jack right behind her. Martha gripped her ankle, her face pale and tight with pain. "Oh, fiddle." Martha groaned softly, attempting to sit up. "My clumsy old legs." Gunner, who had followed Jack, halted at the top of the stairs. He whimpered lightly, ears flattened, sensing the distress of his cherished neighbor. But he didn't rush in or crowd them. Instead, he sat silently, a faithful guardian watching over the vulnerable. "Don't move," Martha Jack said with a rare gentleness. His commanding voice softened to a comforting murmur. He knelt beside her hands, hovering protectively over her injured ankle. "Let Emily take a look." Emily's professional touch was quick and sure. "It's swollen, Martha. We need to get you to the ER to check for a fracture." Martha tried to protest, worried about the hassle and expense, but Jack stood firm. "Ma'am, you're no burden, your family." He lifted the petite woman effortlessly, like she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you." They drove to the hospital in Jack's Jeep. For the next 3 hours, the gang threat faded, replaced by the warmth of real human care. Jack stayed in the waiting room with Gunner, who quickly won over the reception nurses to let him stay. Emily stayed close by Martha's side through the x-rays. The diagnosis, a severe sprain, thankfully not a break. When they got home, Jack carried Martha all the way to her sofa, and Emily carefully arranged the ice packs and pillows, whispering, "You two are angels?" her eyes glistening as she looked at Misty. "I can't imagine life without you." Jack smiled warmly, gently patting her hand. "We watch out for each other. It's the unspoken rule here." It was a quiet reminder for Emily, and perhaps for every soul watching, that true strength wasn't just about standing up to darkness, it was about lifting the people around you. But the comforting glow of that moment slipped away quickly as night dragged its curtain across the city, the wind howling like a restless ghost against the windows. Jack refused to surrender to sleep. He sat alert in his living room, the door ajar just enough to catch the building's murmurs at night. Emily lay restless in her apartment next door, finally succumbing to fragmented sleep, heart eased only by knowing Jack was just a few feet away. Then precisely at 11:45 p.m., the hum of the refrigerator sputtered and died. Outside, the streetlights flickered and plunged the street into darkness. The blackout was instant and complete, yet it wasn't citywide lights still shimmered from the building across the street. This was targeted. Someone had severed the building's lifeline. Jack rose silently, moving like a seasoned predator through the shadows. He reached for his tactical flashlight hanging by his side, but held back from turning it on. "Gunner," he whispered. The dog was already alert. Gunner lay frozen on the rug before the door, body-taut ears perked forward. In the suffocating silence of the blackout, human ears caught only the wind's moan, but Gunner sensed far more. A faint scritch, careful steps. A pause, someone prowled the hallway. Not walking, but creeping soft like leather gliding on carpet. Gunner held his bark. He knew better in moments like these. Silence was their cover. From deep within his throat, a low growl vibrated, heard only by Jack. Gunner's gaze locked on the shadow pooling beneath the door, thicker and darker than the night itself, swallowing the dim, ambient light. They had arrived. This time no warnings would be left behind. The darkness swelled inside the building, not just light's absence, but a tangible, suffocating force. Within apartment 4A, Emily stood frozen in her living room center. Her heart pounded wildly against her chest, a trapped bird desperate to escape. The eerie quiet shattered with a sound that drained the warmth from her veins. The harsh, grinding scrape of metal against metal. Someone was prying at her door. The reinforced strike plate Jack installed held firm, but the wood around it creaked and groaned, buckling under the relentless assault of a heavy crowbar. Panic surged hot, sharp, and blinding. Yet amid the chaos, Jack's voice from their training echoed clear space equals time. She needed a fortress. Emily fought backward, her socks sliding across the hardwood as she scrambled into the bathroom. The bathroom was the only safe haven, no windows facing the hall's solid door that locked tight. She slammed it shut. Twisting the thumb lock, she sank to the floor, trembling hands clutching her phone, its glow piercing the suffocating dark. Desperation fueled her fingers as she typed one urgent message to Jack. "They're breaking in. Apartment 4B. The buzz of her phone in Jack's pocket was unnecessary. He was already moving every fiber alert. He felt the splintering wood from next door the instant it began. Standing firm in the darkened center of his room, Jack closed his eyes just for a breath, drawing a deep, steady inhale. While others might see nightmare, Jack recognized the familiar battleground, the rush of adrenaline senses sharpening like blades and time stretching slow and endless. It swept him back 7 years to a moonless night under Kandahar's dusty sky, a lone figure standing against an unforgiving world. He recalled the intense tension of waiting amidst the breach stack, the chaos of a raid swirling around him, and the sharp clarity that struck when the mission suddenly turned critical. In that moment, chaos was never the enemy, it was a tool. Panic was reserved for those unprepared. He opened his eyes. The fear had vanished. Replaced now by a steely, tactical precision, he glanced down at Gunner the German shepherd, a shadow cloaked within another shadow. Gunner's body was taut eyes flickering with the dim, ambient glow from the city beyond. Words were needless between them. Their bond, crafted in the crucible of combat and tempered in the calm of retirement, was almost telepathic. Gunner sensed the enemy closing in, his whole being thrumming with the urge to strike, yet he held back, awaiting the signal. Jack understood the hallway was a deadly trap. Stepping out the front door would cast him against the harsh emergency exit lights, an open invitation to hostile eyes. He needed an approach they wouldn't anticipate, to become the unseen force, a ghost lurking within the machinery of their defense. Moving soundlessly, he reached the sliding glass door of his balcony. Outside, the wind howled, concealing the faint click of the latch opening. 2 adjacent balconies were separated only by a waist-high brick divider. It was a risky gambit, in the darkness perched 4 stories above ground. But it was the only chance to outflank his foes. Jack stepped into the biting wind, whispering, "Gunner up." Without hesitation, The dog sprang onto the outdoor furniture Jack had moved to the wall, and with a powerful boost from Jack's arm, scrambled over the divider and onto Emily's balcony. Jack vaulted over silently behind him, slipping inside Emily's apartment. The front door finally exploded open with a thunderous crash, wooden splinters spilling across the threshold as it slammed against the wall. The heavy boots thundered across the floor. Tactical flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, flashing frantically across the room, casting shards of terror in broken glimpses. An overturned chair, an empty sofa, a bathroom door firmly shut. Find the girl, get the key to the floor safe. A harsh voice barked orders. It was the leader, the man in the leather jacket. Rip this place apart. Search until you find the stash. Two others fanned out, shoving shelves over and tearing cushions apart. Loud, cocky, careless, they assumed the woman was powerless. They presumed they commanded the darkness. From the balcony, Jack watched the dance of their flashlights inside. He gripped Gunner's harness tightly. The dog's breathing remained slow, deliberate. Jack leaned close, whispering into Gunner's ear. This was what Gunner had been bred and trained for, the very essence of his existence. He wasn't a pet now. He was a missile guided by instinct and command. Jack slid the balcony door open. It wasn't locked. Emily had either left it so in panic or fate had intervened. The wind gusted into the room, stirring the curtains. One thug stationed near the kitchen paused. "Did you hear that he asked, shining his light toward the window?" "Just the wind, idiot." "Grab the laptop," the leader commanded from the hallway. Jack released the harness quickly, whispering into the shadow. Gunner did not bark. A barking dog offers warning, but a hunting dog stalks silently. He slipped into the living room like smoke the wool carpet, muting his paws. He moved low, a ghost weaving between furniture. The thug near the kitchen swung his flashlight toward the window again. His beam swept the floor, finding nothing, but then for a fleeting moment it caught a pair of amber eyes, blazing with raw, primal force. Suspended mid-air in the leap, the man barely had time to raise his arms before Gunner struck his chest. 80 pounds of muscle and sheer kinetic power collided with sickening force, hurling the man backward in a brutal, echoing impact. He slammed into the kitchen island, his flashlight spinning wildly across the floor, casting a frenetic strobe of light amid the chaos. Then the screaming shattered the air, not a cry of rage, but a piercing, primal shriek of a man gripped by terror. He had just realized that he was no longer the apex predator. Gunner had him pinned, jaws clamped with unwavering intensity on the padded forearm of the attacker's jacket. Shaking his head violently in a desperate bid to subdue the beast, the second thug yelled, "What the hell is that?" As he frantically swept his flashlight around, his beam landed on his partner, sprawled on the floor, locked in a desperate struggle with a shadowy beast that seemed born of the night itself. Panic erupted like wildfire. The meticulously planned heist crumbled into raw chaos. "Shoot it, shoot the dog!" the leader bellowed, yanking a pistol from his waistband. But he couldn't find a clear shot. His partner blocked his line of fire, and Gunner twisted swiftly, a living blur of fur and flashing teeth. From the bathroom, Emily heard the crashing and the agony-fueled screams. She pressed her ear to the door, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She recognized that sound. It wasn't the police. It was Gunner. Her fierce protector had arrived, and with sudden, burning certainty, she knew Jack was right on his heels. Jack emerged through the curtains framed by the city's glowing lights, a silhouette carved from determination. He carried no gun, but gripped a hefty tactical baton borrowed from his gear bag. He no longer looked like the neighbor next door. Under the strobing flashlight's eerie dance, Jack resembled a vengeful spirit, a relentless force of justice. "Drop the weapon," he commanded. His voice was soft but sharp, slicing through the chaos like a blade. The leader whipped around, leveling his gun at Jack. But that momentary distraction cost him everything. The dog's ferocious presence had crushed his tactical edge, shifting the psychological tide definitively. The hunters had suddenly become the hunted. The apartment at the hallway's end had morphed into a trap. The living room of apartment 4A was now a battleground, wild and unpredictable, lit only by the erratic flashes of the spinning flashlight. and the dim amber glow spilling through the balcony door. The wind roared through the gap, carrying the electric scent of rain and ozone, weaving it with the sharp tang of fear and sweat thick in the air. Inside, Jack moved with a fierce grace that belied the brutal violence unfolding no longer the neighbor holding the elevator door, but a finely honed instrument of survival. His mind raced, breaking down threats at lightning speed, each movement precise and deliberate. Beneath Gunner's iron grip, the thug emitted terrified, high-pitched howls, the German shepherd's powerful muscles pinning him immobile. 80 pounds of snarling strength kept him rooted. That left only the leader still brandishing his pistol near the hallway, and the third man, the driver from the park. Recovered from his shock, the driver surged forward, crowbar raised like a grim reaper's scythe. Jack didn't flinch. He stepped deliberately into the swing's arc. Closing in on the attacker's guard with fearless precision, the crowbar sliced harmlessly overhead in a whistle of missed danger. In one seamless motion, Jack stabbed the steel tip of his baton into the man's solar plexus. Air fled from the thug's lungs in a wet, rattled gasp. Before the man could fold over, Jack swept his leg out, sending him crashing to the floor with a bone-shaking thud. A swift, calculated strike struck the wrist, disabling the hand clutching the weapon. The driver groaned, curling into a fetal position, defeated. The fight drained from him in mere seconds. "Don't move," Jack barked, his voice booming over the howling wind, demanding complete submission. Turning his sharp focus to the leader, the man in the leather jacket, Jack prepared for the final confrontation. But the room's energy had shifted ominously. While Jack subdued the driver, the leader grasped the grim reality he was outmatched. Panic, the deadliest weapon in a gunslinger's arsenal, gripped the man. He knew firing on the dog risked killing his own man, and before he could fire a shot at Jack, he was overwhelmed. He needed leverage, a barrier, a shield. The leader holstered his pistol and delivered a powerful kick to the bathroom door. The fragile wood, already weakened from the earlier attack on the front entrance, splintered near the lock. He reached inside. Blindly clutching a handful of Emily's sweater, she screamed as she was yanked from her refuge, her feet scraping desperately against the floor. The leader dragged her into the room's center, spinning her until her back pressed against his chest. In his other hand, a serrated hunting knife glinted erratically in the dim light. He pressed the cold blade gently but threateningly against the soft skin of her throat. "Back off," the leader shouted, his voice cracked with desperation. "Back the hell off or I'll open her up." The room froze, the violent tension hanging in a delicate, terrifying balance. Jack paused 10 feet away, baton held low, raising his left hand with palm open, a universal sign of calm. "Easy?" Jack said, his tone switching instantly from command to negotiation. Without looking at Emily, Jack locked eyes with the leader, reading every twitch of his muscles, every bead of sweat breaking on his forehead. "You don't want this. Burglary is bad, but murder means life without parole. Just walk away." Sensing the stalemate, Gunner had released the first thug, who now lay motionless, either unconscious or feigning death. The dog moved to Jack's side, standing rigid with a low, steady growl rumbling deep in his chest. His gaze fixed on the knife, coiled like a spring waiting for the release. "Shut up!" the leader barked, pressing the knife harder. A drop of blood welled on Emily's neck. "Drop the stick. Kick it over here." Frozen in place, Emily smelled the man's stale tobacco breath and felt the cold steel against her throat, her head swimming, her heart pounded so fiercely she could feel it in her voice. She looked toward Jack in the dimness. His face was an impassive mask, but his eyes held a promise, a silent vow that he'd protect her at all costs. "Space equals time," he had said. "Create an opening." She couldn't run. She couldn't fight him off, but she wasn't powerless. She recalled the lesson from her living room just days before. The foot is a complex structure, Jack had explained. Hit it hard enough and the brain resets. She took a steadying breath, bracing herself as the leader screamed at Jack again, distracted by his own fear. Emily shifted her weight, lifted her right foot, aiming blindly, then drove her heel down with every ounce of strength fighting inside her, onto the arch of the leader's foot. The crunch echoed sharply. The leader howled in pain, his balance faltering instinctively. His grip loosened, stumbling back the knife, pulling momentarily away from her throat. Just a fraction of a second, that was all Jack needed. Gunner Pack, in Jack's command, snapped like a whip. Gunner sprang forward with explosive force, targeting not the man's throat or leg, but the weapon itself. His jaws clamped down on the leader's right forearm, the knife-wielding hand with the relentless power of a hydraulic press. The leader screamed again, dropping the blade as the dog's strength drove him backward. They crashed to the floor together. Gunner shook his head furiously, thrashing the man's arm to prevent him from reaching for the pistol tucked in his waistband. Jack arrived with lightning speed, grabbing Emily's arm and guiding her gently but firmly behind him, shielding her with his own body. Then stepping over the writhing leader with cold efficiency, Jack pressed his knee into the man's shoulder. Applying force to a nerve cluster in the neck, the leader's struggles ceased instantly, his body going slack, overwhelmed by searing pain and shock. Jack reached into his back pocket and pulled out a sturdy plastic zip tie, a habitual tool carried by a man shaped by this brutal line of work. With steady hands, he bound the man's wrists behind his back. "Gunner House." Jack spoke softly, and the dog immediately let go of the arm, settling back on his haunches. Sitting calmly, Gunner fixed his gaze on Jack, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths, yet his tail thumped once content and expectant for what came next. A heavy silence enveloped the room, broken only by the wind as it whispered through the open balcony, and the ragged breathing of those locked in battle. Jack rose slowly, scanning the room to confirm the other two assailants were still down and defeated. Finding them, so he turned to Emily. She leaned against the wall, trembling uncontrollably, one hand tracing the small cut marking her neck's fragile skin. Moving toward her, Jack holstered his baton, his touch gentle now as he placed his hands firmly on her shoulders, grounding her. "You did well, Emily," he murmured. His voice was raw, heavy with feeling. "You did exactly what needed to be done. You're safe now. We've got them." Emily's eyes roamed the devastation, the shattered furniture, the subdued criminals, and then the noble dog standing sentinel over them. Finally, she looked up at Jack, collapsing into his chest as tears spilled, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming relief of survival. The piercing wail of sirens sliced through the storm's aftermath, a riotous chorus that heralded the siege's end and the return of order. Within moments, the once quiet street outside the apartment complex shimmered under the flashing reds and blues of half a dozen patrol cars. Sergeant Mike O'Connor was first to cross the threshold of apartment 4, a weapon drawn, but lowered as he absorbed the scene, a trio of intruders bound with zip ties pressed against the wall. Wounded and beaten, they cowered, while Jack stood serene by the balcony, wiping grime from his face, Gunner poised loyally by his feet. Alert, but no longer aggressive, the dog sat as O'Connor sheathed his weapon and let out a low whistle, shaking his head with a tired, admiring smile. "I called for backup," O'Connor said, stepping over a splintered chair leg. "But it looks like you and the fur missile here handled it just fine." Jack gave a weary nod. "They were hunting for something, Mike. They tore the place apart before we stopped them." "Mentioned a floor safe," O'Connor said, signaling two uniformed officers to take the suspects into custody. As the crooks were hauled away, grumbling and groaning, detectives began a methodical sweep of the apartment. It didn't take long. In the small pantry beside the kitchen, beneath a loose floorboard hidden under a bag of dog food Emily had bought for Gunner, they found it. Not a safe, but a hollow cavity beneath the floorboards. O'Connor slipped a gloved hand inside and drew out a heavy velvet pouch with a drawstring. He untied the knot and emptied the contents onto the kitchen counter. Even under the harsh glare of police flashlights, they shimmered with a cold, captivating blaze, dozens of diamonds raw and uncut. The Gold Coast heist, oh ho. O'Connor breathed eyes wide. Marcus Thorne's retirement stash. He must have hidden them here just before he got caught. "So, Emily," he continued, "you've been unknowingly sitting on $3 million in stolen gems." Emily wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, stared at the glimmering stones, disbelief flooding her features as the terror of last night softened into stunned amazement. "I had no clue," she whispered. "I just thought the floorboard creaked." By the time police wrapped up their work processing the scene, dawn was beginning to brush the Chicago skyline with bruised purples and gentle pinks. The storm long passed, leaving the air fresh and clean. Stepping into the hallway, Jack and Emily found it not empty, but alive, a community awakened. The night's chaos had stirred every neighbor on the floor. Apartment doors stood open. Neighbors huddled together, whispering and pointing, their eyes drawn to the center, where Martha held court. Despite a sprained ankle, Martha insisted on being wheeled out in her office chair by her grandson. She radiated pride when she saw them. Though nursing a sprained ankle, she had insisted on being pushed out in her office chair by her grandson, her face lighting up with pure joy the moment Martha caught sight of them. There they stood. She announced, her voice swelling with pride, the champions of the 4th floor. She faced Mrs. Higgins from 4C and Mr. Henderson from 4D. "I told you all, didn't I? I said Jack was a good man, and I told you that dog was sharper than half the folks in this building." She recounted the night's tale, as if she'd lived every moment herself, weaving the story with the expertise of a seasoned narrator. They crept in like shadows under cover of darkness, but they never expected our Navy SEAL and his loyal wolf to save our beloved Emily. Neighbors gathered close, whispering their gratitude and awe. Someone handed Emily a steaming thermos of tea. Another neighbor gave Jack a reassuring pat on the back. It was a moment of deep warmth, a testament to the indomitable spirit of ordinary people standing strong when guarded by one of their own. Jack, usually uneasy with praise, found himself breaking into a smile. He glanced at Emily wrapped in Mrs. Higgins's arms, safe, and that was all that counted. Sensing the calm, Gunnar allowed the neighbors to stroke him, absorbing their affection with a proud, steady wag of his tail. "I need to take him out," Jack told Emily after a while, nodding toward the dog. "He's been on duty all night, he deserves a break." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with a gratitude too deep for words. "Be careful," she said instinctively. Jack chuckled softly in reply. "The bad guys are in cuffs, Emily. We're going to be all right." He clipped Gunnar's leash to his harness and headed to the lobby elevator. Outside, the street still buzzed faintly, with a few police cruisers, but the chaos was fading. O'Connor was finishing paperwork in his car. Jack waved and led Gunnar down the block toward a quiet patch of green by the corner, away from the flashing chaos. The morning air was crisp, filling Jack's lungs as the tension finally slipped off his shoulders. It was over. The danger neutralized, the mystery unraveled. He let Gunnar sniff the familiar fire hydrant patience in every step. The street lay nearly deserted, except for a dark sedan idling near the crosswalk, its engine humming softly. Jack barely noticed. It seemed just another commuter waiting for the light. He turned away from the car to check his phone, planning breakfast for himself and Emily, when the engine's soft hum exploded into a furious roar. This was no slow start. It was the sound of a pedal slammed down hard tires screeching violently on damp asphalt. That shriek jolted Jack's instincts awake. He spun around. What had been a quiet sedan was no longer idling. It leapt the curb, racing down the sidewalk, straight toward them. Behind the wheel, wild eyes burned with panic and fury. It was the 4th man, the getaway driver who'd waded through the arrest